Hey guys, tonight we are going to talk about one of the most rebellious and utterly badass women in history, to the point where you might exclaim, "My God, how did she pull that off?" Yes, it is Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen. She is basically the 16th century version of the woman who told all the men in the world, "I don't need you guys, I have my own crown." So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I am dying to know where you guys are listening from. Is anyone hearing this sleepy voice at 3 in the morning in Sydney? Or are you enjoying the sunset somewhere in Europe? Don't forget to drop a comment with your location and local time. It is truly unbelievable that I am putting people to sleep across every time zone. Alright, find your coziest spot right now. Take a nice, slow, deep breath and let your whole body sink into that soft mattress. We are about to head back to the year 1533, the Tudor period. And trust me, after hearing the stories about the straw mattresses of that era, you will be truly grateful for your modern spring mattress. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Tonight, you will awaken at Greenwich Palace in England, in the year 1533. In a cradle lined with coarse linen, your hands still faintly scented with candle wax and dry straw. Strange, isn't it? But welcome to my sleepy vlog, where we'll drift together into Tudor dreams. Take a deep breath, relax your body, and let me tell you the story of a little princess who entered a world of power from her earliest days. You are Princess Elizabeth, named after both of your grandmothers, a combination that feels warm but carries tremendous responsibility. Instead of being the prince heir everyone expected, you turned out to be the firstborn daughter of King Henry VIII and Queen Anne Boleyn. Oh my goodness. Did you know that the moment your first cry echoed, the Tudor court was in turmoil from disappointment? Because beforehand, King Henry VIII had boldly broken with the Roman Church just to marry your mother, burning with desire for a male heir. And yet the result was simply a lovely little princess, which must have left the palace murmuring, "Now what do we do?" The palace atmosphere at that time was extraordinary. The smell of burning wood from the fireplace mingled with damp-tinged tapestries woven years ago, rushes strewn across the floor, unable to mask the mildew. Every step on the silk carpets was as careful as a whisper. In the distance, the Thames lapped gently against stone walls like a serene soundtrack, the clip-clop of horses on cobblestones, and the cries of rowers drifting into the hush, creating a scene both ancient and suspenseful. It felt as though you were stepping into a historical play, with you as the tiny angel put to the test at birth. Not yet 3 years old, you witnessed the palace's fortunes rise and fall in just 2.5 years. On the 19th of May 1536, your mother Anne Boleyn was accused of adultery and treason, then executed at the Tower of London. That very morning, you were still the legitimate princess. By nightfall, that status vanished, and you became illegitimate in the eyes of the court. King Henry VIII definitively annulled your mother's marriage, declaring it invalid, which meant you were no longer his true daughter. Imagine the shock of a 2-year-old, too young to understand adult matters, only sensing familiar faces grow distant, lavish feasts devoid of laughter, a lavish world shrunk in an instant. Your caretaker, Lady Margaret Bryan, was flustered and unsure what to do. She hesitated. Should I still call her princess? Dress her in silk or coarse linen? Everything was in chaos. As a result, you were moved from Greenwich to Hatfield House in Hertfordshire, a kind of royal exile for children. You might think, like sending a kid to the wilderness for soul nurturing? But for a 2-year-old, Hatfield quickly became the new normal. Forget gilded columns. In their place rose warm red brick walls, stained glass windows filtering soft light, and a vast garden where you could run free without courtly protocol. Your vlogger here wants to emphasize, Hatfield was not a grand palace, but neither was it a prison. It was more like a giant park made just for a princess, where you could feel the earth beneath your feet, breathe free air, and hear birdsong instead of the court watch drums. But don't be fooled into thinking it was a place of absolute calm. Royal status there remained as fragile as a candle's flame in the wind. Under bright daylight, you were still cherished. Under a light drizzle, you might one day hear the court's fortunes change. And that is when you, even at only 2 years old, began to understand how precarious power can be. Happiness is sometimes like a candle's flicker before the breeze. It can be extinguished at any moment, but when it glows, we must cherish every instant. That summer, when you were 14 years old, Hatfield House welcomed a rather stormy guest, Thomas Seymour, younger brother of Jane Seymour, who had doted on your brother Edward. Picture this. It's June of 1547, the air thick with roses in bloom, and in strolls Seymour tall, charming, and nearly 40 himself, always eager for one more playful jest. At first his manner seemed grandfatherly, but soon he was guiding you into rooms before you were properly dressed and accidentally tickling your ribs in a way that left you flushed and uncomfortable. You, a mere 14-year-old, frozen in whatever puckered gown you happened to be wearing, had no idea how to protest. After all, he was a powerful noble, uncle to the king himself. Your stepmother, Catherine Parr Henry VIII's sixth wife, quickly perceived the danger. One afternoon, she burst into your quarters in a fury, her emerald gown flashing, and instructed that you return to your own household under Elizabeth's own command. In practical terms, you gained a measure of independence, but also received a stark warning about the unscrupulous power some men wielded. From that day, you learned that even a loving gesture could cloak peril for a young princess. Not long after, rumours spread through the Tudor court like wildfire, a whisper that you, a 14-year-old, were with child. The gossip tore through corridors and hallways, causing ministers to clutch their beards and noble ladies to faint at the mere mention. Of course, it was utterly untrue, but the panic revealed a harsh truth. Your reputation was as fragile as ducal porcelain. A single false whisper could shatter your future before it had even properly begun. Then came the darkest turn. Thomas Seymour's audacious plot to spirit away your brother Edward, now King Edward VI, and seize control of the throne. Seymour was arrested, tried for treason by the council, and on the 22nd of March 1549, he was beheaded at Tower Hill. Witnessing his fall from grace taught you a vital lesson in self-protection, that power could corrupt with frightening speed, and that trust must be earned, not freely given. In January of 1547, just before all this unfolded, your father, King Henry VIII, had died on the 28th of January. To be exact, and 9-year-old Edward ascended the throne. A regency council, packed with ambitious noblemen and senior prelates, governed in his name. You remained at Hatfield for a while, but your role shifted from princess-in-waiting to observer in the political swamp, quietly studying the flurry of hats, robes, and secret correspondence that determined the realm's fate. You immersed yourself in lessons, honed your resolve, and learned to keep your head down, avoiding dangerous alliances. Yet history was not done with unexpected twists. In the spring of 1553, young King Edward fell gravely ill tuberculosis, most say, and on his deathbed he uttered his final succession plan. First his eldest half-sister Mary, then you, the next in line, albeit illegitimate in his mind. Edward breathed his last on the 6th of July, 1553, aged 15. Before the end of that very day, a council placed Lady Jane Grey on the throne. Jane had been born on the 16th of October, 1558, making her barely 14, though 19th-century rumour inflated her age to 16, thus becoming the 9-day queen. You, the so-called bastard princess, found yourself swept back into the deadly currents of succession. Jane's reluctant reign collapsed under the weight of Mary Tudor's supporters by the 19th of July, 1553, restoring Mary I to the throne. Through it all, you learned the perilous truth. In Tudor England, birthright could be affirmed in the morning and rescinded by nightfall. So there you were, 14-year-old Elizabeth, freshly hardened by court intrigue, trained in languages by day, and schooled in political caution by night. You had faced unwelcome advances, survived malicious rumours, and witnessed treasonous plots unspool at Hatfield's hearth, all of which prepared you perhaps better than any tutor for the turbulent path that lay ahead in the royal saga of Tudor England. In the summer when you were 14 years old, Hatfield became more tumultuous than ever with the arrival of Thomas Seymour, Jane Seymour's brother-in-law, who had once cared so tenderly for Prince Edward. It was the summer of 1547. Elizabeth was exactly 14, and Thomas was nearly 40. He visited Hatfield frequently, but his friendly manner went too far. On several occasions, Thomas led you into a private room before you had finished dressing, placed his hand lightly on your shoulder as if to comfort you, and his accidental jokes made you blush with embarrassment. You, at 14, clever and quick-minded, were still a child before the power and authority Thomas wielded. How could you dare to resist? A wave of unease swept over you when Catherine Parr, Henry VIII's sixth wife, learned of the situation and immediately recognized the danger. Furious, she swiftly removed you from Hatfield and brought you back to Elizabeth's household at Street, James's palace, granting you a measure of independence in your studies and daily life, while also warning you about the instinct to protect yourself from male power. Catherine's action was both a shield and a reminder of how fragile a princess's status could be, a costly lesson in vigilance and self-reliance. As if that were not enough, rumours that you were pregnant quickly spread through the Tudor court, sparking a wave of suspicion. You knew they were baseless, but the lesson was harsh. A royal princess's reputation was so fragile that a single rumour could shatter her future. To address the crisis, the Council of Regency launched an urgent investigation and discovered that Thomas had plotted to abduct Prince Edward in order to seize power. Thomas Seymour was arrested in March of 1549, tried for treason, and on the 20th of March 1549, he was beheaded before the New Palace Gate at Bishopsgate. Though horrifying, this ordeal forged you into a cautious child, learning to protect yourself and understanding that not everyone with the title royalty was a friend. Less than 2 years later, on the 28th of January, 1547, King Henry VIII died at Whitehall Palace at the age of 60. Prince Edward, his only son by Catherine Parr, ascended the throne as Edward VI at the age of 9. The kingdom was governed by the Council of Regency, and you once again took the role of a silent observer, uninvolved in power. You learned by watching. At 14, you moved from Hatfield back to Street, James's, to be near Prince Edward, while also honing your own resolve and steering clear of the complex political manoeuvrings around you. Throughout the early reign of Edward VI, you devoted yourself to study. Mornings spent on Latin, afternoons on mathematics, and evenings listening to theological discussions. You quietly observed the council's meetings, discerning the power plays among the nobility, each eager to manipulate the young king. As a teenage Elizabeth, you held no real power, but that taught you a vital lesson. Silence did not mean weakness. Everything shifted again when Edward VI fell gravely ill. The boy king, born on the 12th of October 1537, when you had just turned 4, was now a frail 15-year-old child, suffering from a relentless cough. In his final days, Edward issued his devise for the succession in early June 1553, attempting to alter his father's succession laws by naming the young Princess Jane Grey as regent for 9 days, and then you as heir. However, royal decrees do not easily prevail, and this devise never took effect. On the 6th of July 1553, Edward VI died at the age of 15. The court plunged into chaos. Jane Grey was declared Queen Jane at the age of 16, and you, the illegitimate princess, were once again drawn into the whirlwind of succession disputes. Jane's brief reign of 16 days ended when your half-sister, Mary Tudor, returned to London, deposed Jane Grey, and reclaimed the throne. You, Elizabeth, were seen as a potential threat at any moment, forcing you again to learn how to survive in the brutal game of power. And so, it was during your teenage years that you, Elizabeth Tudor, began to understand that a throne was not a firm platform, but an arena where every step could unseat you. Close your eyes and drift off to sleep, for many more thrilling chapters await. That summer, when you were 14 years old, Hatfield House buzzed with more drama than a royal masque because in strolled Thomas Seymour, brother-in-law to Jane Seymour, and erstwhile guardian of your dear brother Edward. Picture it. The year was 1547, you'd just turned 14 and Thomas was nearing 40. He visited Hatfield so often that his friendly attentions began to feel a tad too friendly. Several times he led you into a private chamber before you'd even finished fastening your gowns, laid a comforting hand upon your shoulder, and cracked harmless jokes that left you blushing crimson. 14. Clever, curious, but still a child in the face of his authority. How could you possibly protest? Enter Catherine Parr, Henry VIII's sixth wife, heroine of our tale. When she caught wind of Thomas's overeagerness, she flew into a royal rage. With the speed of a thunderbolt, she whisked you away from Hatfield back to your own household at St. James's Palace. Her message was twofold. "You'll have more independence in your studies and daily routines," she declared. "But never forget to guard yourself against the power men wield." In a single stroke, Catherine granted you a measure of autonomy while also forging within you a steely instinct for self-protection. A costly lesson, but one you'd carry with you forever. Almost overnight, gossip spread through the Tudor court that you were with child, a rumour as unfounded as it was devastating. Even though you knew it was false, the damage was real. A princess's reputation was so fragile that one whisper could shatter her future. To restore order, the Regency Council launched an emergency probe. Their findings were explosive. Thomas had plotted to abduct Prince Edward and seize the reins of government. In March of 1549, they arrested him for treason. A trial followed, and on the 20th of March 1549, Thomas Seymour met the block before New Palace at Bishopsgate. Horrifying as it was, this trauma steeled you, teaching you that titles and bloodlines offer no guarantee of safety. Only your own vigilance could do that. 2 years earlier, on the 28th of January, 1547, your father, King Henry VIII, had died at Whitehall Palace at the age of 60. Edward, born on the 12th of October 1537, was crowned Edward VI at just 9 years old. With the kingdom in the hands of the Regency Council, you slipped once again into the role of quiet observer, learning by listening and watching. You left Hatfield and moved back to Street. James is to be nearer to your brother, but you also devoted yourself to honing your resolve and dodging the treacherous political currents swirling around the young king. In those early years of Edward VI's reign, your days followed a studious routine. Mornings spent in Latin lessons, afternoons wrestling with arithmetic and geometry, evenings devoted to theological discussions on scripture. You sat in on council meetings, noting the subtle shifts of loyalty among the nobles, each vying for influence over a child monarch. Though you held no official power, your teenage self absorbed a vital truth. Silence and discretion could be more powerful than a raised voice. Everything changed again when Edward fell gravely ill. The Prince King, already frail from childhood and plagued by a persistent cough, succumbed to tuberculosis. In his final weeks, he drafted a device for the succession in early June 1553, attempting to bypass the established order. His plan named the young Princess Jane Grey as regent for 9 days, followed by you as heir. Yet a monarch's whim could not easily override Parliament. Edward's devise never took hold. On the 6th of July 1553, Edward VI died at the age of 15. The realm plunged into chaos as Jane Grey, only 16, was proclaimed queen. You, the once illegitimate princess, were once more swept into the vortex of succession disputes. Jane's brief reign, just 9 days, came crashing down when your half-sister Mary Tudor returned to London with loyal forces. Mary, daughter of Henry's first marriage to Catherine of Aragon, deposed Jane Grey and restored herself to the throne on the 19th of July, 1553. In the aftermath, you found yourself labelled a potential rallying point for any who opposed Mary's rule. Once again, your survival depended on cultivating restraint, patience, and an unshakable composure. No loud proclamations, no public defiance, only the steady, unflappable demeanour of a princess who knew that every word could be twisted into a threat. And so unfolded your mid-teen years, Elizabeth Tudor, a carousel of perilous power plays, betrayals, and narrow escapes. Each upheaval forged your character, teaching you that the crown is no guarantee of safety. It is a battlefield where a single misstep can lead to ruin. As you close your eyes tonight, rest easy knowing that your story has only just begun, and that even the darkest nights here at St. James's or Hatfield will pave the way for a dawn of legend. Just 9 days after Jane Grey ascended the throne, loyalists to Mary rose up in East Anglia. You, busy playing the role of innocent bystander, pretended to be ill to avoid choosing sides. From your sickbed at Hatfield, you followed the news in hushed whispers. Jane Grey's brief rule crumbled. Mary triumphed, and on Easter Sunday, 1553, Mary was proclaimed Queen Mary I. Almost at once, you recovered your health, stepping forward beside Mary as a symbol of Tudor unity. But the sisterly bond was taut with suspicion. Mary, fervent in her Catholic devotion, faced off against you, raised on Protestant teaching. As Mass resumed in solemn Latin, you bowed your head at the right moments while inwardly recoiling. The early days of Mary's reign crackled with tension. She calmly arranged her marriage to Philip II of Spain contract signed on July 25, 1553, and set about her restoration of the Catholic faith by burning thousands of Protestant dissenters at Smithfield. London's skies filled with mournful smoke. Every damp cobblestone seemed to carry the scent of sorrow. You kept your distance, mastering the art of saying much without revealing anything, praising without committing. When rumours swirled that Mary might be expecting a child, you played the part of the sympathetic sister, congratulating her carefully, offering discreet comfort when the pregnancy proved false. Your piety performance was flawless. You knelt precisely when expected, crossed yourself at every dip of the censer, and exuded the air of a dutiful novice seeking guidance. In that time, you learned how essential it was to avoid the Queen's harsh scrutiny. Then, in November 1558, Mary quietly passed away at St. James's Palace at the age of 42. You, still at Hatfield, received word of her death in the hush of pre-dawn, and for the first time in your life, the court heralds proclaimed you as Queen Elizabeth I at the age of 25. You inherited one of the most challenging thrones in English history, an empty treasury drained by religious wars, a nation split down the middle by faith, and an administration riven by corruption and fear. Yet despite the daunting landscape, you were ready, or at least determined, to become what they called an active queen. Immediately, you set about stabilizing the realm. You summoned Parliament in January 1559 at the Palace of Westminster, where 2,000 of England's most powerful peers and bishops gathered under the cold winter air. You spoke the ancient words of coronation with a steady voice, presenting yourself not merely as a figurehead, but as a living symbol of continuity and hope. Clad in white, the emblem of virgin purity, you reminded them that you belonged to England alone, unbound by foreign marriage. But private worries gnawed at you. The purse was bare after Mary's lavish Spanish wedding, rent and subsidies owed to garrisons along the Scottish border, and hostile powers circling like wolves. France eyed Calais across the Channel. Spain's armada still loomed in rumour. Scotland's lords might yet invade. Not to mention the endless petitions demanding you marry, produce an heir, and secure the succession. You learned quickly to deflect with a wry smile and a gentle, "I shall consider it in God's good time." At Hatfield and later at Whitehall, you re-established your household. You gathered a cadre of loyal advisers, chief among them William Cecil, whom you appointed Secretary of State on March 2nd, 1559. His steady counsel balanced your more impulsive instincts. You also placed Francis Walsingham as your spy master, entrusting him with decoding secret letters, unmasking plots, and intercepting conspiracies that threatened your rule. Meanwhile, you prioritized the Church of England's settlement, crafting the Act of Supremacy and the Act of Uniformity in April 1561. These laws reaffirmed the monarch's authority over the Church while prescribing a moderate Protestant liturgy with no more popish bells or vestments. You declared that those who outwardly conformed would be tolerated, hoping to avert the bloody persecutions that had stained Mary's reign. In the meantime, you breathed new life into the Royal Navy, investing in faster galleons, upgrading cannonry, and commissioning captains like Sir Francis Drake and Sir John Hawkins to ply the seas. By 1565, your fleet had intercepted countless Spanish treasure ships in the Caribbean, bringing wealth and prestige back to the coffers at Whitehall. Through it all, you cultivated your image as the Virgin Queen, using your unmarried status as a diplomatic lever. When England needed alliances, you dangled the possibility of marriage to princes from Sweden, France, or the Netherlands without ever committing. And at home, your annual progresses across the countryside became legendary spectacles, strengthening your bond with the common people. Yet, behind the regal poise, you never forgot how you had once been the plaything of rumours and plots. Each smile concealed a calculation. Each bow hid a plan to watch and wait. You carried with you the lessons of your youth, the fragility of reputation, the dangers of intimacy with powerful men, the necessity of watching from the shadows. So as you rest your head tonight, remember that the path of a queen is paved with perils and intrigues. But you, Elizabeth Tudor, had already weathered storms from Seymour's unwanted advances to Mary's fierce devotions. Now, as England's ruler, you would use that hard-earned wisdom to steer your kingdom through whatever tempests lay ahead, awake or asleep. The night before your procession to London, you knelt beneath the broad canopy of the ancient Hatfield oak, listening to the breeze whisper of your new destiny. The year was 1559, the date November 26, and dawn would soon break on your first journey as England's monarch. In that hush, you breathed deep, letting the scent of moss and cold leaf mold your courage. At first light on November 27th, you mounted a white steed bedecked in silken trappings and set off along the muddy lanes toward London. Your cloak, a gown of the purest white wool, billowed in the chill air. On your head sat the golden crown, and in your gloved hand you held both the scepter and the orb symbols of sacred power. As you passed, lines of courtiers dropped to their knees, voices echoing through leafless trees. Elizabeth I. Elizabeth I. The November fog clung to your horse's mane, as though London itself exhaled relief and expectation. Your coronation took place at Westminster Abbey in January 1559, the precise date the 11th of January, in a ceremony both magnificent and nerve-wracking. 2,000 of England's highest-ranking peers and bishops filled the chilled nave, their breath visible in murmured prayers. As you stepped forward under centuries-old stone arches, you felt the weight not just of the golden diadem, but of every prayer and petition that had carried you here. Yet in your heart, worry fluttered like a sparrow. The treasury was empty. Mary's religious campaigns had drained every coin. Scotland, newly allied with France, cast a wary eye north of the border. The Spanish fleet, still formidable, patrolled the Channel. At the banquet that evening in the banqueting house on Whitehall's riverfront, marriage proposals rained in like arrows from Europe's courts. Philip II of Spain, the young King of Sweden, the Archduke Charles of Austria, each offer sterner than the last. You nodded and listened, lips pressed in an enigmatic smile, all the while knowing that marriage meant sharing your crown, your body, and your realm with a foreign prince. So you refused to rush. Instead, you transformed your unmarried state into diplomatic dynamite. You became, quite deliberately, the Queen of Perhaps. When England needed naval support, you dangled the prospect of marrying Sweden's king. When Spain's threat grew loud, you hinted at possible Spanish alliance. You played each suitor off against the other, letting your court watch in equal parts awe and frustration. And then there was Robert Dudley, your childhood confidant, sweet Robin. From the moment you saw him at Kenilworth Castle in 1560, bearing gifts of tapestries and exotic animals, court gossip ignited. Dudley hosted 3 splendid weeks of masque and music, fireworks every night, a water pageant on the lake, and a feast of gold plate and silver punch, all designed to sway you toward marriage. But tragedy struck. In September of 1560, Dudley's wife, Amy Robsart, fell down the stone stair and broke her neck. The official inquest ruled it an accident, but tongues wagged endlessly. He murdered her for the Queen's hand. Despite the scandal, you allowed Dudley to remain at court just your restraint, a testament to your control over rumour's incendiary power. By the close of the 1560s, you had steadied Parliament and consolidated your personal authority. You enacted what became known as the Elizabethan settlement. You preserved the Church of England under royal supremacy, allowed public Catholic worship by those who would conform outwardly, but outlawed papist vestments. The compromise satisfied no one fully, yet it held the kingdom together. At the same time, you rebuilt the Royal Navy, commissioning sleek galleons designed for speed and heavy cannon, and supporting privateers like Sir Francis Drake to harry Spanish treasure fleets in the Caribbean. Their spoils replenished your empty coffers while weakening Spain's grip on the New World. You governed not by the traditional means of a male consort, but through your own resolve. Your diplomatic style was supple. You balanced treaties with force, marrying words to warships. When word came of unrest in Ireland or plots among the northern earls, you dispatched swift, decisive action. You cultivated a network of intelligence, Francis Walsingham, as your spy master, ensuring you learned of conspiracies long before they came to bloom. In these years, your unmarried status became your greatest asset. Courtiers and foreign ambassadors alike knew that you alone held power over your person and your kingdom. You played the tension masterfully, one day promising marriage when the realm is secure, the next day alluding to mystical marriage in heaven. Through it all, your image as the Virgin Queen, white-clad, crown gleaming, orb and scepter raised, was etched into every mind. So as you lie down tonight, let these memories carry you into slumber. The oak at Hatfield whispering your name, the November dawn upon your cloak, the hush of Westminster as you took your vow, the clash of cannon, and the crackle of spy networks hidden in shadow. The year is 1560, and you, Elizabeth Tudor, have become a monarch defined not by marriage, but by your unfaltering will. Sleep well, for tomorrow you will continue to steer England's fate awake, alert, and always ready. In 1567, your cousin Mary, Queen of Scots, fled the turmoil of her own kingdom and sought sanctuary at your Whitehall doorstep. She was 35 years old, born on December 8, 1537, and carried with her the elegance of a French court upbringing. Yet, as she crossed into England in May, she became nothing more than a highly guarded guest. You arranged for her to reside in a series of country houses, first Bolton Castle in Yorkshire, then Sheffield Manor, and finally Chatsworth House in Derbyshire, ostensibly for her health, but also to keep a close eye on her movements, balancing compassion with national security. Mary wasted no time stirring trouble. In the shadows of those grand estates, she conspired with Catholic supporters both at home and abroad. Secret letters flew through coded ciphers, messages were smuggled inside wine barrels, and ink-laden missives were hidden within the bindings of books. By 1569, the plot you feared materialized. The Northern Earls' rebellion. Charles Neville, Earl of Westmoreland, and Thomas Percy, Earl of Northumberland, raised their banners in Yorkshire on November 19, 1569, proclaiming their loyalty to Mary and planning her marriage to Thomas Howard, the Duke of Norfolk. Their goal was as ambitious as it was clear: free Mary, place her on the English throne, and cement a Catholic restoration. But you were ready. Your spymaster, Sir Francis Walsingham, had agents woven into every tavern, cathedral, and embassy. Within weeks, the conspiracy unravelled. Norfolk was arrested on December 2, 1569, and the rebellion crushed before it truly began. Executions followed swiftly. Percy was beheaded on June 28, 1570, and Neville fled to the continent. Your decisive action sent a message. You would not tolerate a foreign-backed Catholic coup in the very womb of English power. Throughout this crisis, you maintained a facade of clemency toward Mary. You refused to indulge in whispers of accidents befalling the captive queen, an ethical line you would not cross. Instead, Mary's fate hung over the court like a guillotine blade, suspended by a single thread of moral and political calculation. Then came another hammer blow. In May 1570, Pope Pius V issued the papal bull, Regnans in Excelsis, excommunicating you and absolving all Catholics of allegiance to your crown. Suddenly, every seditious whisper could claim divine sanction. In August 1571, the Babington plot struck at the very heart of your reign. Anthony Babington, a young Catholic gentleman, orchestrated a scheme to assassinate you in order to free Mary and restore her to power. But once again, Walsingham's network of codes and double agents intercepted every letter. One crucial missive secreted in a beer barrel revealed Mary's direct authorization of the assassination plan. When the cipher was broken, you held proof. Your cousin was not just a passive figurehead, but an active co-conspirator. And there it was, in black and white, or rather in invisible ink, revealed by heat and vinegar. Mary had signed her own death warrant. A queen's conscience is a heavy crown to bear. For months, you hesitated. To execute a fellow monarch, your own cousin felt against every instinct of mercy and familial loyalty. Councillors urged swift justice. Parliament clamoured for her head. But you waited, prolonging the agony of indecision. On the 8th of February 1587, with hands that trembled more from duty than fear, you at last signed the death warrant for Mary, Queen of Scots. The execution took place at Fotheringhay Castle on that same day, and Mary's head fell from the block, draped in red, the colour of martyrdom. That bitter act marked the most harrowing moment of your reign. You had spared countless plots and rebellions through negotiation and restraint, but Mary's execution was a calculus of survival. Allow her to live, and conspiracies would never cease. End her life, and you risked Alexander's vengeance but gained a measure of security. As the sun set on that cold February evening, you must have felt the weight not only of the crown upon your head, but of the blood of a fellow queen on your hands. That winter, less than 2 months after Mary's head fell, Spain struck back with its greatest armada ever assembled. King Philip II ordered the so-called Armada of God, 130 ships, 30,000 soldiers, and 1,500 cannons gathered at Lisbon, determined to invade England, depose you, and restore Catholicism. Reports arrived daily. Shipyards worked around the clock, merchant convoys ferried munitions, and intelligence from Sir Francis Walsingham warned that the fleet would sail down the Bay of Biscay, link with the Duke of Parma's army in the Netherlands, then cross the Channel. You moved swiftly to counter the threat. First, you restructured the Royal Navy, commissioning smaller, faster galleons bristling with medium-caliber guns, training crews in long-range broadsides, and drilling every sailor in rapid reloads. Your captains Charles Howard, Lord Admiral of England, aboard Ark Royal, Sir Francis Drake on Revenge, and Sir John Hawkins on Victory led squadrons that prized manoeuvre over massed firepower. Your strategy was elegant. Avoid facing the Armada's heavy culverins in a head-on line of battle. Instead, dart in for a thunderous broadside, then slip away before the massive guns could respond. On the 19th of July, 1588, from the cliffs of Cornwall to the headlands of Devon, signal fires leapt into the night sky, alerting coastal garrisons that the Armada was on the move. In Whitehall's map room, you watched the plotted course by lantern light, fingers tracing the crescent formation the Spaniards would adopt off Calais. When your council agreed, you authorized the use of fire ships, empty hulks laden with pitch and gunpowder, set ablaze and steered into the enemy's anchorage. The hope, so panic, forced the Spanish to cut anchor cables and shatter their formation. In the pre-dawn hours of August 7th, Drake's squadron executed the plan. 12 vessels, ablaze from stem to stern, drifted into the heart of the anchored Armada. The hulking Spanish galleons, tightly packed in a defensive crescent, cut cables in confusion as flames licked their timbers. Screams and shouted orders echoed over the water. When the fireships burned themselves out, the Armada lay scattered. At dawn on August 8th, your lighter, faster fleet struck. 22 English warships converged on the disordered Spanish flotilla off Gravelines. From beyond the range of Spain's heavy guns, English broadsides roared across grey waters. Smoke cloaked the sea like a rolling mist, and galleons that had once seemed invincible now listed and sank under the withering attack. Thousands of Spanish sailors plunged into frigid waves as gun decks collapsed, the sea itself claiming more than half their number. Night fell on August 8th with grim news. The Duke of Medina Sidonia, seeing his formation broken, ordered a retreat northward around Scotland. Caught in violent storms and wrecked on rocky shores, the Armada limped toward Ireland. There, many survivors were slain by hostile clans or perished in shipwrecks. When the remnants returned to Spain, only around 60 of the original 130 ships remained afloat, and nearly 15,000 men had died. It was the most devastating naval defeat in Spain's history, and a triumph for England's island defence. Your proclamation came fast. On August 20th, you acknowledged the victory before Parliament, praising Howard, Drake, and Hawkins for their daring. Nationwide, bonfires burned on hills, bells tolled in every parish, and thanksgivings filled churches from Canterbury to York. Merchants reopened their warehouses. The treasury received a windfall from captured Spanish bullion, and morale soared. England had withstood the mightiest armada ever sent against it. Behind the scenes, you turned your attention to rebuilding and modernization. Shipyards at Deptford and Chatham expanded, new galleons were laid down, and you authorized additional funds for ordnance upgrades. The victory cemented England's naval reputation and encouraged overseas ventures. Privateers, emboldened by royal letters of marque, pressed on Spanish treasure fleets in the Caribbean, further swelling the treasury and striking at Spain's global reach. At court, you balanced triumphal celebrations with sober vigilance. Madrid seethed with plans for revenge, and discreet French envoys whispered over gilt tableware. Yet you greeted each ambassador with practiced graciousness, offering teas and liqueurs as you deftly steered diplomatic discussions toward trade and peace. In the Privy Council, Cecil and Walsingham continued to network spies across Europe, ensuring that no plot, whether Spanish, French, or Catholic, could rise unobserved. By autumn 1588, England claimed mastery of the Channel. Coastal villages reported fewer privateers' raids, as the English Navy patrolled new sea lanes with confidence. Shipwrights refined hull designs to combine speed and stability, while gunnery experts improved powder mixtures for cleaner burns and longer range. You approved the construction of coastal blockhouses and beacon towers, completing a chain of watchfires that would spot any future invasion attempts within hours. Thus, in a single summer, you turned the tide literally against a force meant to overthrow you. Your gamble with fire ships and your faith in maneuver warfare had paid off. Spain's armada was no more. England, once vulnerable, emerged dominant at sea. And you, Elizabeth Tudor, stood at the heart of this triumph, your name synonymous with the naval power that would define your reign. On the 9th of August 1588, you pulled off your greatest public feat of showmanship. You rode into Camp Tilbury to rally your troops. Imagine 20,000 English infantry massed along the Thames estuary, pikes bristling, muskets at the ready, their breath steaming in the cool dawn air. You arrived clad in a silver breastplate and a white velvet gown, mounted on a stately grey charger that edged its way through ranks of cheering soldiers. As your horse's hooves clopped on the muddy parade ground, you dismounted and strode confidently among the men. With a warm handshake here, a nod of thanks there, you let every trooper see that their queen, though delicate in appearance, stood shoulder to shoulder with them. And then, raising your voice so it echoed across the camp, you delivered the line that would echo down through the centuries. I may have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king, and of a king of England too. The soldiers' cheers thundered across the fields, rattling tolling bells in distant villages. In that moment, you transformed from sovereign to symbol, the embodiment of England's indomitable spirit. Word of your Tilbury speech spread like wildfire, carried by mounted couriers to every corner of the realm and whispered in every European court as proof that your virginity was not a liability but a diplomatic weapon. Within hours, your name thundered through Parliament and into every alehouse. Bonfires were lit on high hills from Kent to Cornwall. Church bells pealed in thanksgiving services across London, York, Norwich and Exeter. You personally commissioned medals depicting you as Deborah, the biblical judge who led Israel to triumph, an apt symbol for a queen who had just rallied her people to national salvation. But beyond the spectacle, the Tilbury muster sealed England's future as a naval superpower. Before your speech, Spain's fleet, the armada of 130 sail and 30,000 troops, had posed an existential threat. Now, fresh from the victory at Gravelines, your armies stood ready at the beaches. When Philip II's disorganized remnants finally limped north towards Scotland on August 9th through 12th, they found not an easy landing but a wall of prepared English pikemen, militia and Royal Marines. That logistical nightmare, combined with storms battering the Spanish fleet around the Orkney Islands, meant few of Spain's ships ever returned home. Your personal presence at Tilbury elevated the Royal Navy's triumph to a national legend. England's captains Charles Howard, Francis Drake, John Hawkins, and their crews were hailed not just as marauders of the Mediterranean, but as saviours of the realm. You rewarded them with titles, land grants, and those Deborah medals. You also doubled down on your naval reforms, expanding shipyards at Deptford and Chatham, ordering up an additional dozen galleons in the autumn of 1588, and commissioning new artillery designs for long-range accuracy. Every victory at sea now bore the crown's imprimatur. On the diplomatic front, you parlayed the Armada's defeat into favourable treaties. With Spain stunned by its defeat, you opened talks in the winter of 1589 to ease tensions. You also strengthened ties with the Dutch Republic, sending arms to Protestant rebels and forming the foundation of the 12 Years' Truce in 1596. Your refusal to wed meant that you alone held the balance of power, using your unmarried status as leverage to secure alliances on English terms, rather than as a vassal of a foreign prince. Back home, the cultural renaissance that flourished under your reign, spearheaded by Shakespeare, Marlowe and Spenser, found a new audience in the aftermath of Tilbury. Playwrights staged dramatizations of your speech. Poets invoked Tilbury's Silver Queen as an icon of English liberty. London's theatres brimmed with allegories of phoenixes rising from flames, a fitting parallel to the nation's revival as the Spanish threat dissipated. By the close of 1590, England's transformation was undeniable. Where once the Channel had been the gateway for invasion, It now served as a highway for English galleons to the Americas, Africa, and Asia. The seeds of your successor's empire were planted in those post-Armada years. Merchant companies formed East India, Virginia, and your naval dominance protected their voyages, birthing a global trade network that would enrich England for centuries. But none of this would have crystallized without the spirit you ignited at Tilbury. You showed that a queen could stand in armor, shoulder to shoulder with her soldiers, and that a single speech could become as potent as 1,000 cannons. You turned your image as the Virgin Queen into a beacon of hope, proving indelibly that personal virtue could be a statecraft tool, and that the mightiest empire on earth could be held in check by the heart and stomach of a woman who refused to yield. In the hush after the bonfires died, you returned to Whitehall a little wearier, a little wiser, but ready for whatever storms lay ahead. The Armada was broken, but the work of ruling had only just begun. England, under your watch, had become a force to be reckoned with on land, sea, and in the realm of ideas. And you, Elizabeth Tudor, carried in your breastplate and your heart the sovereign certainty that you, a weak and feeble woman, had the soul of a king. After the victory of 1588, you doubled down on securing England's supremacy at sea. You ordered the expansion of the Royal Navy from its existing 70 ships to over 100 by the mid-1590s, each vessel outfitted with the latest wrought-iron cannons capable of firing 1.5 pounds, shot beyond 200 yards. You modernized powder magazines and overhauled gun carriages for quicker reloads. 2 new royal dockyards sprang up: Chatham on the River Medway, authorized on February 1st, 1589, and Deptford on the Thames, rebuilt and expanded through grants on May 20th, 1590. With these works complete, England held de facto control of the Strait of Dover, watching the narrow seas that Spain once dared to challenge. You didn't stop at royal fleets. You issued letters of marque to privateers, men like Sir Walter Raleigh, commissioned on June 29th, 1587, and Sir John Hawkins, who'd pioneered this practice since 1582. Their barks and galleons stalked the Spanish treasure routes in the Caribbean, seizing gold and silver from galleons bound for Seville. Between 1589 and 1595, those prizes filled the exchequer with over £250,000, enough to fund 2 new regiments of foot soldiers for Ireland and bolster coastal fortifications in Kent and Cornwall. On the domestic front, you cemented the religious settlement that had begun in January 1559. The Act of Supremacy, restored on January 23rd, 1559, reaffirmed your role as Supreme Governor of the Church of England. Days later, the Act of Uniformity, passed on April 21st, 1559, established a single Book of Common Prayer in English for all parish churches. The liturgy allowed for public Catholic rites, bells, vestments, and Holy Communion at the altar, provided participants accepted the spiritual supremacy of Parliament. Crucially, you declared that dissent was permitted so long as it remained peaceful. "We require no violence of conscience," was your phrase. This compromise kept the peace, encouraged merchants from the Low Countries to settle in London, and drew scholars like Giordano Bruno and John Dee to your court. Ever mindful of threats from within, you built England's first professional intelligence service. Under Sir Francis Walsingham, appointed Principal Secretary on April 22nd, 1573, a network of spies, codebreakers, and informants stretched from Paris to Rome. Walsingham's agents intercepted letters, cracked ciphers, and reported on every whisper of sedition. From uncovering the Ridolfi plot in 1571, which aimed to marry Mary, Queen of Scots, to the Duke of Norfolk, to foiling the Babington plot in 1586, your spies dismantled conspiracies before they could breach Whitehall's gates. You rewarded Walsingham's loyalty with lands in Kent and a secret pension of £1,000 a year. Amid these upheavals, you presided over a golden age of culture. William Shakespeare first appeared in London by 1590, writing histories like Henry VI, parts 1 through 3, that dramatized your father's reign. Edmund Spenser published The Fairy Queen in 1590, weaving an epic allegory of your virtues. Christopher Marlowe's Tamburlaine, staged in 1587, dazzled audiences with its portrayal of ambition and power. You commissioned masks from Ben Jonson for Twelfth Night celebrations, and funded the rebuilding of St Paul's Cathedral's choir in 1593. Your patronage extended to science and architecture too. You granted charters to what would become the Royal Society in 1560, its informal meetings beginning in the 1560 seconds where thinkers discussed astronomy, anatomy, and navigation. You supported John Dee's mathematical research for naval exploration and Robert Hooke's experiments in microscopy. Architects like Inigo Jones, arriving in London by 1596, introduced Palladian facades for new public buildings and private townhouses, blending classical harmony with English practicality. Through naval reform, diplomatic compromise, and cultural patronage, you shaped a confident England, one that emerged from the Armada's shadow to claim its place among European powers. Your reign became synonymous with intellectual ferment. Elizabethan drama, courtly masques, burgeoning natural philosophy, and the steady hum of shipwrights and cannon foundries. In that calm after the storm of 1588, you solidified a legacy not just as a ruler who defended her realm, but as a sovereign who transformed it into a beacon of art, learning, and maritime mastery. And so, asleep or waking, picture the Thames lit by lanterns, the echo of shipwrights' hammers at Chatham, and the hush of candlelit libraries where the next Shakespeare or Spenser might be dreaming, just as you once dreamed beneath that Hatfield oak, plotting England's bright future. We're in the 1990s of the 16th century, yes. The 1590 seconds, when your court began to murmur uneasily about the question no one dared ask out loud. Who would follow Elizabeth Tudor? For decades, you had deftly dodged the marriage proposals flung at you by Europe's crowned heads. Philip II of Spain, Archduke Charles of Austria, King Eric of Sweden, each hoping to secure an alliance by wedding the Virgin Queen. You entertained each with gracious smiles and thoughtfully measured responses. You never committed, however, turning your chastity into a potent diplomatic lever. When Spain threatened, you hinted at Spanish marriage. When France threatened, you toyed with a Huguenot match. You became the master of maybe, compelling Europe's great powers to woo you on your terms. Behind all that glitter, your true heir lay north of the border. James Stuart, King of Scotland, James VI, born on June 19, 1558, the son of Mary, Queen of Scots. Educated in the Protestant faith, he embodied the union of Tudor blood and Reformed religion that you longed for. You never publicly endorsed him. Parliament petitions in the 1990s still begged you to name your successor, but you never outright declined his discreet overtures. His letters, sealed with silver wax and rolled in crimson ribbon, arrived at your privy chambers at Whitehall throughout the decade. And though you did not respond directly, no banished courier returned empty-handed. In your heart, you recognized James as the best hope for post-Elizabethan England. As the 16th century drew to a close, you outlived nearly every peer and rival. Your hair silvered, and your joints ached, yet each morning you rose to attend council meetings, receive foreign ambassadors, and grant knighthoods. On March 1st, 1598, you knighted Sir Walter Raleigh in the Great Hall of Whitehall. On July 14th, 1599, you personally signed the charter for the East India Company, launching England's future imperial reach. Even as arthritis slowed your steps, your mind remained sharp. Speech to Parliament in February 1600 was delivered with clear precision, despite the tremor in your hand. But time spares no one. In March 1603, you fell seriously ill. Historians debate the cause. Some say pneumonia, others a brooding melancholia, compounded by gout. But by March 24th, 1603, just before 3 o'clock in the morning, you slipped away peacefully in your private apartments at Richmond Palace. No grand farewell address, only the hush of those who watched over you as the Virgin Queen departed without fanfare, as quietly as the candle's last flicker. Your reign had lasted 44 years longer than any English monarch since William the Conqueror. You left behind a kingdom transformed, a fleet of over 100 galleons guarding the Channel, a church settled between extremes, a treasury replenished by privateers and trade, and a cultural renaissance that would echo through ages in verse, drama, and discovery. James VI of Scotland, your chosen yet unnamed heir, heard the news at Dunfermline Palace. Within weeks, he crossed the border, landing at Dover on April 20th, 1603, and was proclaimed James I of England. Thus the crowns of England and Scotland united, fulfilling your tacit design for harmony between the two realms. So, as you drift into that final, dreamless sleep, remember, You navigated threats from Spain and plots from within, harnessed marriage proposals as diplomatic currency, forged a church settlement that muted sectarian strife, and fostered a golden age of exploration and art. England emerged from your reign as a naval power, a hub of learning, and a beacon of Protestant liberty. And now, as our journey through the life of Elizabeth Tudor gently draws to a close, allow your thoughts to drift on the soft currents of history's lullaby. Imagine the pale moonlight filtering through the tall windows of Whitehall Palace, its silver glow dancing across tapestries and polished oak floors, as the last echoes of courtly laughter and council debate fade into the hush of evening. Picture yourself reclining in a quiet chamber, a single beeswax candle flickering low upon an ebony stand, its warm light paling before the coming dawn. In these final moments, we slow our pace to a whisper, tracing the delicate contours of a life that taught us the courage of conviction, the wisdom of compromise, and the power of gentle perseverance. From cradle to crown, Elizabeth's story reminds us that true strength often wears a soft veil, that leadership can bloom from kindness as easily as it does from steel, and that a single voice spoken with conviction can ripple through the hearts of thousands. Let go of the clang of armaments and the clamour of intrigue. Release the weight of battles won or lost, and feel your chest rise and fall with ease, attuned to the steady rhythm of your own breath. Picture the rolling green fields of Hatfield, the hush of the Thames on a summer's eve, and the quiet dignity of a queen who bowed only to her own moral compass. These images melt slowly, like morning mist dissipating under a gentle sun, leaving you with a tender sense of peace. As you drift towards sleep, take with you the message that endurance tempered by empathy can outlast the fiercest storms, and that an unyielding will, guided by compassion, becomes a beacon not just for kingdoms, but for every human heart seeking its true north. Remember that the greatest victories are those won within the triumph over doubt, the mastery of fear, and the quiet affirmation that each of us can shape our own destiny with grace. And so, we close this chapter with one final soothing whisper. May your dreams be as bright as Elizabeth's legacy, your rest as deep as the wells of her courage, and your awakening filled with the promise of a new day. Sleep well, gentle listener, and if this quiet voyage through history warmed your spirit, float over to subscribe so that our next tale, fresh, enchanting, and just as stirring, can find you here in this tranquil harbour of stories that caress the soul. Good night.